Hello, everyone. We are going to start the webinar in just a few minutes. So if you want to just sit tight and think about any questions you might want to be asking today, and we'll let some folks flow in for a minute or two here, and then we'll get started. Okay. I think we might as well get going here. So thank you all so much for being here today. And we are really excited to do this webinar. This is the last webinar in the series for the Pollinator Stewardship series that we've put together here. So I want to thank you all so much for coming, and we're going to talk about spreading the buzz about bees, expanding your impact with outreach. And we're going to do a few minutes of introductions. We'll keep them short and sweet, and then we will go right into the content. So this webinar series has been created by Pollinator Partnership Canada, along with partners, Habitat Acquisition Trust, which I'm part of, also Saanich Native Plants, and Parks Canada. So my name is Paige, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator at Habitat Acquisition Trust. And I'm here with Laura Mirandon from Pollinator Partnership Canada, Amy Peltier from Parks Canada, and Sarah from Habitat Acquisition Trust as well. So I will pass the torch over to Laura, and she can get started on the intro.
Oh, hi. Sorry, did you just want me to introduce myself? Okay, well, you did a great job. I'm Laura from Pollinator Partnership Canada, and I'm a senior pollinator specialist and a program director. And we do a lot of work to protect pollinators through many different ways, through research, through habitat creation, outreach and education, policy advising, and a number of other ways. Next page.
Amy, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Amy Peltier, and I'm a Species at Risk Engagement Officer with Parks Canada here in Victoria. Parks Canada is a federal agency, and across Canada, we're responsible for national parks, national historic sites, and also national marine conservation areas. And a big focus of our work is habitat conservation and restoration. I've been with Parks Canada for 10 years and had the privilege to work on restoring Garry Oak ecosystems, coastal sand ecosystems, and then the plant species at risk that are found in those ecosystems. And over the past 3 or 4 years, part of that learning has been learning how these habitats support pollinators and how when you restore them, you really are restoring habitat for pollinators. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Amy. And Sarah, do you want to take a moment to just introduce yourself as well? Sarah might be getting her tech all set up. So we'll, oh, there she is.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Sarah and I'm the Conservation Technician for the Habitat Acquisition Trust, and I'll be the moderator for today's presentation, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, so as I mentioned, these are the partners, and we're really excited to have everybody here today. And Kristen Muskelly from Saanich Native Plants sends her hellos as she does work restoring habitat for butterflies this weekend. So I did want to take a minute to acknowledge, we're talking about, you know, the relationship between humans and pollinators and our shared surroundings. And these are intricate and ancient relationships, and protecting them is essential. It's also important at these times to be aware that these creatures, these pollinators, are part of stewarded First Nations territories and are considered relatives of the Coast Salish people in our area. And these nations include the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation, the Chiana First Nation, the Sauk First Nation, as well as the 5 Saanich nations, so Pakwachin, Sayout, Sartlip, Sakum, and Malahat. And we want to you know, create opportunities for education about these, you know, the plants and especially the pollinators. And that is a real honor for all of us here today. And we hope there is appreciation and stewardship garnered for nature through raising awareness by this webinar. So we did want to quickly acknowledge our fantastic funders for this series, Whole Foods, Van City, and Growing Together, as well as support from all the partners. So Laura will dive deep into what it takes to become a certified pollinator steward, but you can find more information on the website listed there. So today's talk is a 1 hour approximate presentation, and then you're welcome to type your questions into the Q&A section throughout the presentation. And there will be about 20 to 30 minutes of questions, and there will be a prize at the end for those that are able to stick around. So one of the prizes is a bee house for mason bees, but potentially other bees as well, and it's handmade in town by Wouter Cleve, and the winner will be chosen at 2:30. And if you're chosen, you'll need to email Laura at lm@pollinator.org to claim your prize, and it must be picked up in Esquimalt. So that's kind of for local folks. And then the second award or prize is a package of 4 nature cards, greeting cards that are blank inside, and 4 wildflower seed packs that are local species. And if your name is drawn for that, you need to email me, paige@hat.bc.ca, to claim your prize, and we can mail that out locally. Great. So as I mentioned, we've got 3 speakers. We've got our bios here, so you can listen to the recording and watch and read our bios if you'd like, but it's myself, Laura Morandin, and Amy Peltier. So we're going to dive into this spreading the buzz about bees and other pollinators, and how to expand your impact through outreach. And we're going to get started. So I wanted to highlight 5 things you can do as an individual to spread the buzz about bees. We're going to go through each one of these in a bit more detail, And then I'll pass it over to Laura and Amy to talk more expansive about that. So the first one is learn and share. The second one is observe and report, being active in your community, buying with bees on the brain, and create and protect pollinator habitat. So the first one I wanted to emphasize is the importance of learning and sharing valuable information about pollinators. And this can be just a simple task that anybody can do. You don't need any particular tools. It can just be a conversation over the phone or in person, you know, safely distanced if you need, and talking to everyone about the importance of pollinators. There's lots of wonderful information out there. For example, this article was published in the Times Colonist, and there's Laura Mirandin in that photo about different Canadian communities taking part in a butterfly project. And this is, you know, an amazing initiative and something that can really inspire your friends and family and coworkers. So having these articles handy, and I'll talk a bit more about some other options. Another idea would be to host a pollinator themed event or fundraiser. So that could be a virtual talk like this, you know, have a viewing party of a couple of these webinars, do a networking event, or maybe try a COVID safe event like a bee walk, an educational walk where you, in the spring and summer, looking for different kinds of bees. You can also post different images, facts, articles on social media or by email, or, you know, even on the bulletin board at your office or at your school. But especially local organizations that are doing amazing projects and just doling out all kinds of interesting facts. These are just a few examples of organizations that have a great online presence that you can then extract all kinds of great articles and facts and photos. So there are lots of these, as well as our partner organizations, Habitat Acquisition Trust, Saanich Native Plants, and Parks Canada, and then all of these wonderful ones as well. And if you have suggestions of other ones that aren't listed, just pop them into the chat, and we can share those as well. So to continue the learning and sharing, if you want to connect with like-minded pollinator stewards, we do have an email listserv that you can join to get advice and tips and new research articles from fellow stewards. So that's through Laura Mirandin. You can email Laura to get put on that list. I also want to encourage folks to write into the newspaper. You know, local papers will publish opinion pieces from citizens, and highlighting the importance of pollinators can really help get the word out. These are just a few examples of articles that were published locally from folks that are doing research or hosting events and workshops. And then, of course, a great way to learn and share information is to become a pollinator steward certified through Pollinator Partnership Canada. And then the next step, of course, would be to find a space to be a steward for. So it could be, you know, like we've talked about in these webinars, even your backyard, your porch, your balcony, or patio. It could be an existing space that already has perhaps a garden or some habitat that you can enhance. Look at your neighborhood parks, your school, or even a community garden that might need a bit of a pollinator boost. Or if you have a space or know of someone with a space, you can let other stewards know through the listserv or other networks. So the second one we were talking about is observe and report. So this is really important to get some of that research and data recorded. Start to be observant about what kind of pollinators you're seeing, how many you might see, what kind of flowers or other plants they're visiting, what kind of nesting they're doing. Just getting that, that observation skill running on a regular basis can really help. And if you're wondering about a species, identification, it's really important to take a photo, and many photos can also help. Videos can be really helpful as well. But just doing that observation and having that recording can really be helpful down the line. Another opportunity would be to report that. So if you're making those observations just for your own knowledge, that's fantastic. Another way could be to report it through different avenues. One of them is the citizen science app called iNaturalist, and we did talk about this before, so I won't go into detail, but there are great projects you can join within iNaturalist, including the Backyard Bumblebee Count, and I have got a photo of that here. And it's a great project that you can then upload your observations to. So just this summer, they had, through the summer, you could post any bumblebees you saw to this project, and it's sort of a collection of which bumblebees people saw in their backyard during the summer. There's another one called Pollinators, and a third one, if you're on Vancouver Island, called Biodiversity of Vancouver Island, and that's one based right here to gather more information and data around the species on the island. And perhaps there'll be an Island Pollinator Initiative or a Pollinator Steward project as well, so keep an eye out for that. Another great way to observe and report would just be using the Insight Bee app. You can either do that through the computer, through your Apple iOS device, or even on paper. I find it's a really accessible way to go, and you can record that data and report it back to the scientists behind that. There are also some great ID books and websites. I have an example there of the bumblebees of the Western United States, and that one is a great resource for local bumblebee ID. And you can ask an expert. Emailing photos to the Royal BC Museum. Their entomology department has some amazing identification experts, as well as Pollinator Partnership Canada, and even HAT, we can connect you to the right folks. But don't forget to write it down. That can be critical, you know, where you saw it, what you saw, what time of day, any kind of data like that is really helpful. And check out webinar 8 for more info on identification. So the third one we recommend is to be active in your community, and that can look like a lot of different things. One of them is to volunteer for restoration projects that create or maintain important natural areas that serve as fantastic bee habitat. So I gave the example of Halliburton Farm, their biodiversity project I volunteered for in the past, and they have a pollinator stewardship program where there are lots of mason bee and leafcutter bee boxes, bumblebee boxes, and maintaining, cleaning those is part of that process. And there are many other organizations that do fantastic restoration work, like HAT and the Greater Victoria Green Team, and lots of other ones out there. And I know you can volunteer with Parks Canada at Fort Rudd Hill to do some restoration. So keeping that in mind, you can really make a difference doing that work. You can also volunteer for monitoring projects. One you could look up is the Bumblebee Watch and Pollinator Week. And I know that'll be talked about more down the line with Amy and some examples there. And then the other one would be, don't be shy about participating in public process. And by that, I mean encouraging all levels of government to promote and apply pollinator conservation actions like pesticide restrictions, allowing boulevard gardens, allowing sort of wild spaces and long grass if needed. And Laura will talk a bit more about that. But as a citizen and as an individual, supporting those and encouraging them can be really valuable in making change. So number 4 is buy with bees on the brain. So that means being a conscious consumer when it comes to buying different products or food that you're consuming. So do a little bit of research and find out, what is involved in the almond milk that you put in your cereal every morning. What goes on to make that happen? And asking nurseries or garden centers to carry native plants or plants that aren't treated with pesticides. And look at supporting local businesses that have committed to pollinator-friendly practices. Ask them, are they part of any programs? Do they have any restoration projects on their land? How do they help pollinators? And one way to find out more about businesses and farms that are doing that great work, you can look at the bee-friendly farmers with Pollinator Partnership, as well as Habitat Steward farms, so farmers who are also habitat stewards through HAT. And there are lots of other similar programs out there. You can find out more. So the last one we recommend to individuals to make a difference is creating good habitat. And when I say good, I mean you're wanting to think about the whole picture of the pollinator. So you're wanting to not just about the food and the flowers, but also, do they have shelter for nesting, for resting? Do they have access to water? And of course, just enough space to live. And our webinars 1 through 7 really go into detail about all these different ideas of creating habitat, whether it's a meadow, a wetland, a boulevard, leaving those wild spots, planting native plants, and making a dedicated pollinator habitat garden can really go a long way. And this is an example of my backyard where I had a fence line that was pretty boring looking, and so I filled it with pollinator friendly wildflowers like goldenrod and mountain sneezeweed and fireweed and gumweed and lupins. And it was amazing to watch the changes in the pollinators that would come and visit just this year compared to previous years. I spent a lot of time just standing there watching the bees visit. And when you create the good habitat, if you're interested in creating things like bee boxes or bee nesting structures, make sure you're using a good design. And that means it's a design that allows you to take it apart and clean it and maintain those bees' cocoons and ensure that they'll have a great life into the spring. And we want to remember also that these boxes are a learning tool. You're not gonna sort of magically save bee populations by putting up a bee box, but they can be really valuable when it comes to learning and observing more about those bees. And this is an example, this photo of a habitat steward who created a mason bee hotel and wanted to make sure it was, well protected, but then he could take out those boxes and clean those cocoons. And it was a great way for him to learn about bees, but also to let his neighbors know what he was up to. And going back before I head over to Laura, we've got one example I just wanted to highlight of habitat signs. And so, like I said, with our habitat steward there, it can make a huge difference if you just put up a sign to let your neighbors and other folks know what you're doing. And one of the examples is pretty simple. So the photo on the bottom left is just a wooden spoon from the thrift store that we colored in with markers with the kids that we're working with, and just a sign to say, let this be. There are bumblebees nesting in and below these lavender plants. And that could just be also, this is a space for bees to visit. Let's not step on it. And then the example, if you missed it in one of the last webinars, was JoJo's Butterfly Garden, a young habitat steward who was really passionate about providing habitat for butterflies and educating her neighbors. And she set up these garden baskets, filled them with native plants that were friendly for butterflies, and all kinds of resources and signs. And lots of people stopped to check it out, and just emphasizing the importance of letting the folks know what you're doing as you do it can really have an impact to the pollinators and to the community. So that is your 5 tips on how to make an impact using outreach as an individual. And now we're going to go over to Laura and talk. She's going to talk a little bit more about what businesses can do and groups as well.
Great, thanks, Paige. And I'll just take a second here to get mine started. Okay, can you see my screen there? Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. I'll get started here. Paige, let me know if you're not seeing what you're supposed to see here. Okay, all good. Great. Well, thanks for being here, and thanks for being part of our last webinar in this series. I'm going to cover what organizations can do to help pollinators through outreach. So, as Paige said, I'm not going to be focusing on habitat creation or land maintenance, which we've covered in a number of the other webinars. But instead, the topic of this webinar is the larger, more broad impact you can have by spreading the buzz and reaching a wider audience, so that uptake of conservation for pollinators goes far beyond you and your organization. I'll start with actions that different organizations can take with governments and then corporations from small to large. And then I'll end with some examples of what you can do as part of a community group and how you can spend your knowledge or spread your knowledge and inspire others. So a lot of the actions that I'm going to talk about within these 3 categories of organizations could be done by different types of organizations or even by individuals. So there's going to be a lot of overlap here. And the ideas and examples aren't exhaustive by any means, but they're really meant to get you thinking and inspired to conduct outreach in any way that works for you or your organization. Okay, so starting here, speaking about what local governments can do. First, it's important for local governments to examine their own policies, examine your own policies, and start by recognizing policies that are beneficial to pollinators that you might already have in place, and ones that maybe aren't so beneficial to pollinators, and adjusting your policies to align with pollinator conservation where possible. So, for example, government policies could prioritize native pollinator plants. Land management can be adjusted to increase value to pollinators, things like, reducing mowing, reducing insecticide use. And then you can expand this to policy and regulations for the community and different things that might benefit pollinator populations. You can also work to educate your community, and there's so many ways that you can do this through social media, through signage, through events, brochures. And finally, you can support your community's efforts to promote pollinators through things like grants and having those resources available to the community. So a few examples of what some local governing bodies are doing for pollinators. Some of these groups are groups we work with, some are not groups necessarily that we work directly with, but are doing great things for pollinators. The City of Toronto over on the left-hand side there recently developed a Wild About Bees brochure to help people understand the differences between native bees and managed bees and the issues that they're facing and how best to help. On the right is a great brochure by the district of Saanich on how and why you'd want to do naturescaping in your yard. And you can find both of these online pretty easily. Stephanie Woods from the City of Victoria talked in depth on the last webinar, webinar 9, about what the City of Victoria is doing for pollinators. And this includes using native plantings in the garden beds and supporting boulevard gardens, amongst many other things. So if you're interested in learning more about what the City of Victoria is doing for pollinators, you can check out the recording from the last webinar. And another example of what governments can do is to certify as a bee city. Through the charity Bee City Canada, cities and towns can become bee cities through an application process. This charity was founded and is run by Shelley Candle, who is just so amazing. She's shown here on the right-hand side in her bee outfit. And the program, she modeled it after Bee City in the US that's now being administered by the Xerces Society. It used to be a standalone charity. So now we have Bee City Canada that's been running for a few years, and Bee City communities support collaboration and establish and maintain healthy pollinator habitat within a municipality or First Nations boundaries. Becoming a bee city has a lot of benefits. They're outlined on the website, and bee cities make commitments to pollinator conservation and community education. Under the Bee City umbrella, you don't just have to be a municipality or a First Nation. You can also become a bee partner, a bee school, a bee campus, and I encourage you to check out the website and learn more about what it involves and the benefits to your community or group. Okay, so to sum up what local governments can do to spread the buzz, first, make changes to your own practices to help support pollinators. Develop policies or regulations that will help protect pollinators in your region. Let your community and other communities know what you're doing and help provide educational resources to the community. And finally, support community conservation through resources and financial support if possible. Okay, next I'll move on to ideas and examples of what you can do if you're part of a company or business or really any size industry here. And this can help increase your impact for pollinator conservation. Of course, it can start with changing your land management or practices and creating pollinator habitat. Whether you're part of an organization that manages rights of way or you have room to put in a pollinator garden at your office building. But beyond habitat management and creation, there's some great ways for businesses to help inspire wider conservation and action. You can start by involving and educating your own staff, or if you are staff, asking your executive to incorporate pollinator training and activities. You can show your customers and stakeholders what you're doing for pollinators in a number of ways, including through social media, by certifying your practices and using signage. And I'll go into some examples of this in a minute. And you can include collecting data on how your habitat is helping pollinators. And then you can share that data with customers and other stakeholders. And then there's many ways to partner or support community actions and community education. And I'll provide a few examples of that. And again, keep in mind here that I'm just providing some examples. There are many ways to expand your impact, and I do encourage you to use these ideas, but also be creative in developing your own. Okay, so involving staff in any habitat creation you do on your lands or on lands in the community really helps increase staff morale and helps with team building. And it can also help teach and inspire staff to make changes on their own lands. And we've worked with many different companies to do staff plantings, and they're really fun activities and educational too. Honeybee is a company based out of Prince Edward Island and is an example of a company that we've been working with to educate their staff on pollinator issues and pollinator conservation. We've just finished a 3-part Lunch and Learn series with their executive and staff. And we're now working with them to develop projects for the spring where they can connect with the community and support pollinator conservation. If you're creating habitat for pollinators on your lands or adjusting your management practices, including data collection can be a great way to show what you're doing and to tell your story. These are pictures from some pollinator monitoring we did along the American River Parkway in Sacramento, California. We were working with PG&E and SMUD, which is maybe a bit of an odd acronym, but that's the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And we assessed if reducing their mowing along these utility rights of way and controlling invasive plants could help increase native plants and also the pollinators along that right of way. Also, I listed certifying your activities as a great way for business to show what you're doing for pollinators and conservation. So for example, if you're in the farming business, you can meet the criteria to certify as a bee-friendly farm. Or if you created a pollinator garden that meets the criteria, you can certify as a bee-friendly garden. And you can check out the P2 website, Pollinator Partnership website, to see more about these certification programs. One of the benefits of certification programs are that you can then let people know on your website and on your products that you're managing your lands in ways that help pollinators. And we're currently updating and expanding these programs, and you can check it out on the website down there at the bottom of the screen. And you don't necessarily need to certify your area to, help get the word out. So as Paige mentioned, just putting up pollinator habitat signs is a great way to let people know that you've created habitat for pollinators, and it can inspire action in others. So these are 2 signs that are available free for download on our website. And a lot of other organizations have signage as well that you can check out. And you could also work with pollinator organizations or other pollinator experts to create more detailed informational signs about pollinators and habitat for your business grounds or habitat that you help to create in the community. And you can provide tours of your habitat. So Amy's going to talk in more detail about some tours that they do at Fort Rod Hill. And celebrating Pollinator Week. This is a great one. It's been brought up already, but for all different types of organizations and for individuals, this is a really great way to get involved in pollinator conservation and inspire staff, inspire customers, and the wider public to take part in pollinator conservation and learn a bit more about pollinators. And each year we provide a free toolkit for Pollinator Week with ideas for what businesses and individuals and governments can do for Pollinator Week. It's always the 3rd week of June. This is the one from last year, of course. And businesses can connect with the community and start conversations through art. The top here is an example of a mural at a coffee shop in Toronto, and I really love it. I think it's really creative and striking. And on the bottom is a mural at an airport, and I really love the connection between migrating monarchs and airports. Businesses can also support education by sponsoring materials such as the Pollinator Partnership Canada School Garden and Curriculum Kits. And Whole Foods has done that in the past with us so that we were able to provide some of these kits free of charge to a couple schools in the CRD. Or businesses can sponsor programs such as the Green Spots program through HAT, which helps create native plantings and outdoor learning spaces at schools. Pollinator habitat can be promoted by businesses doing plant or seed giveaways. As a business, you would need to partner with local pollinator and native plant organizations to make sure that you're providing plants that are meant for your area and will support pollinators. And finally, businesses can support pollinators by sponsoring other educational material like these posters that we do each year and distribute thousands of them to schools and community groups and agencies. And you can see there's a number of sponsors that we put on those posters. And that really helps us get the word out in a fun and beautiful way about pollinators and pollinator habitat and the importance in our lives. And each year we have a different theme for our poster. Okay, so I'll finish up here with a few ideas and examples of what community groups can do to support pollinators and spread their knowledge and passion. Community groups can create pollinator gardens, of course, and gathering places. And they can show what they're doing through many of the channels we've already discussed: social media, certification, signage, and they can create or host pollinator-themed art installations. And you can use these places to teach children in the community about pollinator conservation. You can initiate a community group to help support pollinators, or you can find out if there's already community groups in your area that are working together already to conserve pollinators. So for example, the David Suzuki Butterfly Way Rangers are active in a number of locations across Canada, and you can find out more about them on the David Suzuki website. This slide shows Project Swallowtail. It's a collaborative approach to creating and connecting urban pollinator habitat in West Toronto. And it involves hundreds of residents and some what are called block ambassadors, which are super volunteers. There's about 50 of those, and they act as local project hubs. And they recruit their friends and neighbors, and they share plants, they grow plants, and they lead activities. And with this project, we hope to not only connect habitat, but we're also connecting people to each other. And we're currently working on finding funding to initiate similar community connection and planting programs in other regions of Canada. We partnered with the Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design to create a pollinator habitat and art installation a few years back. We worked with the Yates Street Community Garden, led by Janet Strauss, to house the native bee apiary at their community garden in downtown Victoria, the Yates Street Garden, and it's been there ever since. So the Yates Street Community Garden Group has done some amazing and inspiring outreach in the community based out of the Yates Garden since then. So some examples, they've had children from 2 downtown daycare centers come and tend their own pollinator garden. And they were involved in activities to increase their awareness and understanding of these important little creatures and their role in our food production. They've hosted story time with librarians from the Greater Victoria Public Library, including a pollinator puppet and a guitar, and the little kids ran around the garden, and they were apparently very enthusiastic and excellent at spotting the bees at work. They've also hosted cocoon cleaning and storing workshops, and they've expanded their pollinator gardens into the downtown boulevards near the Yates Garden, and they hope to create a pathway of habitat connecting different habitats. And they also report that they're seeing an amazing abundance and diversity of bees since putting in the native bee apiary and art installation, and then all the additional bee houses and bee plants that they've been putting in the last couple years. Community groups can get together to work with nonprofit organizations or just on their own to install gardens, and they can become a focal point in learning areas for the community. So this is Jenny Lotz, who used to work with Pollinator Partnership Canada, and she's leading a pollinator garden planting at the Vic West Community Centre in collaboration with the Vic West Food Security Collective and the Vic West Community Association. And she has also done gardens like this at Work Street, at the Work Street Garden. And we'll be installing some interpretive signage in this garden here at Banfield at the Vic West Community Centre in a few weeks. And you could have your community group come together to do fun projects related to pollinators. So it could be art projects, it could be creating bee houses with proper designs, or it could be cocoon cleaning parties, as shown here at Halliburton Farm. And this picture was taken by Paige. And you can also come together as community groups, getting groups together to do bio blitzes or pollinator observations. And Paige has already talked about this, you know, but I do want to highlight that we're in a time where people are probably feeling more isolated from each other, not seeing people as much. We're seeing people on screens a lot, two-dimensional, and forgetting that people are really three-dimensional and more. So, you know, getting out into nature can, at this point in time anyways, be done safely and in small groups and taking precautions. And, you know, it can provide a way for people that are feeling isolated to have more of a sense of community and get in touch with nature. So, you know, you can organize these types of activities following the current safety guidelines for COVID. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to talk about some outreach and education that Parks Canada is doing. And then at the very end, I'm just going to briefly touch on the Pollinator Steward certification program, because I know that's of interest to a number of you here.
Still on mute. There we go. Okay, I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that now. Please let me know if one of you if I can't get, okay, great. So thanks folks. I just wanted to spend a few minutes giving a local case study of what Parks Canada has been doing in the Victoria area to expand the impact of some of the habitat restoration work that we're doing through outreach and education.
Nice. Hey, Amy, it looks like we
Yes.
can see your like presenter view.
Oh,
You might have to do the old switcheroo
okay.
of your screen. We'll give it a try. I love that photo. Is that nodding onion?
It is.
And a
Okay.
bumblebee of some variety.
Okay. So I think I gotta bring it over here.
Yeah, try that out.
One second. Okay.
I was also just going to remind folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A button, probably the bottom. And we're happy to address those as at the end. So feel free to ask questions right in there. That looks perfect, Amy.
Okay, good. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me, folks. So yeah, just to give you a little orientation as to where we're talking about, I'm going to be speaking about the habitat restoration work that we've done at Fort Rod Hill and Bisgard Lighthouse National Historic Sites. Now my slides don't want to advance. There we go. Okay. So here's Southern Vancouver Island, just going to zoom in. Fort Rod Hill and Bisgard Lighthouse National Historic Sites is a historic site managed by Parks Canada in the West Shore communities. It's part of a significant green belt connected with Royal Roads University, as well as some lands managed by the Department of National Defense. And as part of that, we're sort of, just significant habitat for Garry Oak ecosystems, coastal Douglas fir ecosystems within the region. And the area I'm talking about is our Garry Oak Learning Meadow, which is highlighted in red there. And this is just a picture of what it looks like in the springtime. So this is a 1 acre lawn to meadow demonstration site. If you want some more details on how we created this site, I gave a presentation during the Creating Meadows for Pollinator webinar earlier in the series. But one thing that we really wanted this space to be is a living classroom for public education about Garry Oak ecosystems and about the species at risk they contain, but also the abundance of wildlife that they support, including pollinators. And a few years ago, I was lucky enough to take my pollinator stewardship training through Pollinator Partnership Canada and Habitat Acquisition Trust and Saanich Native Plants. And so since then, we've been trying to expand the impact of our outreach work and talking more about pollinators. So a few of the strategies that I'm going to cover is using social media, school programs, some of the special events that we've held, and then some outreach in the community. And these are really just to give you some specific examples, maybe spark some ideas of things that you can do with your organizations. So yeah, social media, as Paige mentioned, is a great way to spread the word to your followers. At Fort Rod Hill and Fisgard Lighthouse, many of our followers follow our account because they're history buffs and they're interested in, say, military history, which is a big focus of interpretation at the fort. But then we also have a following of people who are more interested in the natural history as well. And we hope that by putting out these kind of posts, we make some converts of the history-oriented folks to also think about supporting pollinator habitat. So for example, you can follow Fort Rod Hill and Fisgard Lighthouse National Historic Sites on Facebook and on Twitter. Usually our posts are seasonally oriented. So during the springtime when things start flowering in the Garry Oak Learning Meadow, we do a lot more posts and updates about what's flowering. We put on a big push during Pollinator Week, where we provide education. We also try to highlight other groups that have, or try to highlight the content of other groups as well, so that we can cross promote each other. The second thing that we've started doing is, as I mentioned, having the Learning Meadow be a living classroom, and a part of that is inviting school groups to come to Fort Rod Hill for different programs. And in the past couple of years, we've started developing programs focused on pollinators. So for elementary schools, we developed this Be a Pollinator Protector program, or Be a Pollinator Pal. And in this program, we sort of cover the basics of, what are pollinators? What is pollination? We look at pollinator life cycles. We do some dress up in different bee costumes and fly costumes so that we can illustrate the differences between types of pollinators. And then the kids are sent out into the meadow to look at, to do a sit spot and maybe do some sketching and have a look see if they can see different kinds of pollinators, and really trying to just get them to pause for a little while and see what differences that they can see. We then come back together and we talk about some simple actions that we can take at home or at school to protect pollinators. And at the end, we all take a pollinator pledge. And I've posted this one here that's from Bee City, Canada. That is that you can look up on their website, and is a really just simple, has some very simple actions that people can take, planting native plants in your garden, choosing to purchase pesticide-free plants, all sorts of good things, easy things that they're easy things that kids can understand and that they can bring home to their parents and talk about as well. We also bring in middle school and high school students, and so we adapt our program for those age levels. With the middle school and high school students, we actually get more into pollinator identification. So using the approach used by the Insight Citizen Science app, which has been mentioned several times during our webinar series, we teach the kids how to sort of quickly group or categorize pollinators into sort of their different groups. So whether they're a bee or a fly or a wasp or a butterfly, for example. We then divide the kids into groups, and they each choose a different patch of native wildflowers and spend 5 to 10 minutes actually counting and grouping the pollinators that they see. And each group chooses a different wildflower species so that we can compare our results at the end. And really the goal of this program is just to create awareness of the great diversity of pollinators, for the students to practice observing pollinators, and to show them the potential to become citizen scientists and make valuable contributions to monitoring pollinators, you know, whether or not they choose to continue doing that at home or at school. And here's just an example of what the Insight Citizen Science app looks like on a mobile device. But we usually use paper scorecards as well that can be printed, and just makes it a bit easier for school groups that we might not have enough technology to go around. And here's just an example of a volunteer who is observing the pollinators that are coming to visit our great camas patch, and she's using a paper scorecard in that case. We also provide a lot of guided tours for university and college groups. We get interests from, you know, classes that are studying restoration or studying botany, for example, or we have a group from UBC Forestry that comes every year to learn about Garry Oak ecosystems. So we provide guided tours. Sometimes we bring in guest naturalists as well to sort of expand on or add on to what we can provide to folks. And usually with these older kids, we also combine a component of hands-on ecological restoration. So we might do some work in the meadow of planting some plants or collecting seeds, or we might do some invasive species removal. And with these groups too, depending on their time, we often involve them in pollinator ID and monitoring at sort of a higher level. Okay, so the second way that we've tried to expand the impact of the Garry Oak Learning Meadow and awareness of its importance to pollinators is through special events. So in 2015 and also in 2017, we had a BioBlitz, which I think is something that Laura mentioned, but a BioBlitz is like a timed event. Often they're 24 hours long, and it's a race to record as many species as possible in a defined area. So with this one, we focused on all of Fort Rod Hill, but we also really wanted folks to come into the meadow and record pollinators there. With BioBlitzes, you usually have a combination of sort of families showing up, citizen scientists who might have some knowledge, and then also we invite experts in the field. So the Royal BC Museum, for example, sent some of their invertebrate experts, and other local naturalists also dedicated their expertise. And that's a great way to sort of to be able to pair those sort of more experts with some of our families and citizen science, and to have a great sort of interchange of knowledge. So yeah, here's just an example of one of our guest experts doing some pollinator surveys in the meadow, while another one is taking photos for iNaturalist. And then we tried to make it really accessible for families too. So we had a station where folks could learn about using iNaturalist. We did a lot of promotion in advance, trying to encourage people who are coming to download the iNaturalist app and get familiar with it. But then we had a help desk to provide tips, and also a mobile Wi-Fi station so that participants could upload their observations and we could see our species tally grow. So again, iNaturalist, if you're not using it, it's a great tool. If you have if you want to keep track of your observations for, say, your own restoration area or own pollinator meadow, you can create your own project, or as Paige mentioned, you can follow other projects and your observations will add to those projects. And if you're curious, you can always follow us at Growing Together, and you'll be able to see what kind of observations we're making at Fort Rod Hill and also in Gulf Islands National Park Reserve. Another thing that can sort of ways that you can expand your impact is to partner with other organizations. So during the BioBlitz, we invited other organizations like CRD Parks and Habitat Acquisition Trust, Saanich Native Plants and the Victoria Natural History Society, and they came, and it became sort of a family festival, and they set up different learning stations. So here's an example of one of the CRD Parks naturalists giving a dress up program where she's got kids dressed up as a bumblebee, a wasp, and a blue orchard mason bee. And they're talking about, yeah, how to tell the difference between these and the different ways in which these species pollinate. And then at the top is just, Parks Canada had a pollinator safari station where the experts who were in the learning meadow catching insects could bring them over to this station, and we could put them in bug viewers and give families and kids a chance to look at them up close. We've also tried to use Earth Day or to create Fort Rod Hill as a destination for Earth Day over the past number of years. So this was from, I think, 2017 as well, and we had a station where families could come and make seed bombs with pollinator-friendly native plants. So seeds that we collected from the Garry Oak Learning Meadow, you mix them with a bit of mud and clay and water, and then the kids can go away with this little seed bomb that they can use to take back to their house and plant in a pot or their garden, or to take back to their school. As Laura mentioned, art is a really great way to bring people together and to connect around pollinators. So this was a project we did in 2017 as well, where we had one of our former co-op students, actually, who's an artist, design some murals, and then our volunteers helped us paint them. And in the process, you know, we talked about the different native plants and the different pollinators that were in those murals. Something that if you live in the city of Victoria that you can do, you can apply for something like a Migrate Neighborhood Grant, and I've seen them used for doing things like painting pollinators on telephone poles on your street, or in some cases you can even get permission to do street murals. So you could have bees or butterflies flying up your street. This is another example of using art. So we've had a lot of great students over the years, and this student, Alan Rutherford, created a whole series of coloring sheets focused on native plants and pollinators, and also on plants that are species at risk. And we're working on putting those into a coloring book, but it's something that we often have during our outreach as sort of an activity for kids to do. We'll have like a coloring station, or we give them out to schools. And we've created a series of seasonal coloring sheets for the Garry Oak Learning Meadow. So just to try to talk about what the different plants and animals are doing in different seasons. So for the fall and winter, which is now, we have things like our queen bumblebees, which are overwintering underground. And we have sort of cocoons of solitary bees that have, like mining bees, for example, that have tunneled into pithy stems. And then, yeah, on the back, we give some idea of what the things are. Sometimes you have to be quite creative in making the connections at a National Historic Site between, well, military history and the importance of sort of creating habitat. And this was an idea that we took from the Victory Gardens for Bees book by Laurie Weidenhammer, who is a Vancouver-based artist and pollinator expert, and she does a lot of outreach and education. And in this book, she talks about how during the war years, one of the things that families and women on the home front were asked to do was to plant victory gardens to help grow fresh food that would support sort of the troops overseas. And, you know, North America really took up the cause, and victory gardens were put in place in churches and schoolyards and backyards and all sorts of land. And they produced tons and tons of fresh food to support the war effort. So during an event that we had at Fort Rod Hill that was focused on women on the home front, we had a booth talking about how we need to create with a similar sort of energy victory gardens for bees. And that's what Lori Weidenhammer talks about in her book. So we sort of played on that concept. We had some of the sort of old propaganda or posters from the wartime, and we dressed up our our students as folks like Rosie the Riveter, and folks made seed bombs, and it was kind of a neat way to try to make a connection to military history, but then also creating habitat for pollinators. So yeah, it worked quite well. So another way that we, or I guess I would say that volunteers have really been a big part of creating the Garry Oak Learning Meadow. And now we have meadow stewards that help keep it thriving. And one of our favorite tasks to do with our volunteers is to collect native wildflower seeds in the late summer and to create seed packets that we're then able to give away to individuals or groups or schools that are interested in creating pollinator habitat. So that's another thing you can think about. If your restoration area sort of produces an abundance of seed, you could always share the wealth and give some away to your neighbors or colleagues. And finally, the other kind of outreach we do around pollinators is to attend community events. So community events are usually always happy for people to sign up to have booths. So we seasonally attend a whole bunch of different ones, like the Victoria Pride Festival, Esquimalt Earth Day, Camosun Sustainability Fair. We attend local markets like the Sydney Island or the Sydney Night Market. And yeah, just develop different kinds of engagement activities, like for example, this trivia wheel to draw people in and start talking about pollinators. We also have a bunch of different native bee boxes, and we talk about how people can use bee boxes and maintain them properly, and the differences between yeah, what good bee boxes look like and which ones commercially available that might not be so good for bees. All right, and finally, this is an example of our booth at Carfree YYJ. Using costumes can be a really fun way to engage the public and families and grab attention. And so we created this bumblebee costume here. Well, it's actually a bee costume that can be transformed to illustrate the different ways that different kinds of bees carry pollen. So in this case, we're demonstrating a pollen belly or a pollen belly bee. So the mason bees, for example, that carry pollen on their fuzzy stomachs. But we also have a pair of fuzzy pants that we can put on to illustrate like pollen pants bees. So the groups of bees that carry pollen on their hairy back legs. And then we also have little sort of saddle bags that we can attach to illustrate that honeybees and bumblebees carry pollen in pollen sacs. And then our other student there is sporting a fly visor. So just to show the difference between the shape and position of eyes on flies and the length of their antennae. And we use this costume a lot with our school groups, and we often dress up the teacher, and the students really enjoy that. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you for listening today, and good luck spreading the buzzword about pollinators.
Thanks so much, Amy and Paige. And it has started at the wrong spot here, so I'm just going to quickly go to the right spot. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to end here, and this is because this is the series end for the Pollinator Steward certification training webinar series. And I'm going to give you a bit of general information about the Pollinator Steward certification if you want to continue on to become a certified Pollinator Steward. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now because we will be hosting a meeting where we can all see each other and talk about steward certifications and create a bit of a community. But I'll give a little bit of information here for you in case you're not sure what this is and you're interested in finding out more. So this series of webinars is the training basis for Pollinator Steward certification. So you need to watch all 5 of the mandatory webinars and at least 2 of the optional webinars. And you can find out the details about which ones are mandatory, which ones are optional by going to the Island Pollinator Initiative website under the new webinars tab. And to become certified, you also need to complete 2 actions. 1 action in each of habitat for pollinators and 1 outreach action. And the actions to complete the certification are really flexible. A habitat action could be something like creating a pollinator garden at your office or changing the way you manage your yard to make it more pollinator friendly, or supplying plants or funds for a school to create a green spot. The outreach activities that are required likewise are super flexible and could involve doing a walk outside with coworkers to show them some pollinators and pass on your knowledge from this course. Or you could put up a pollinator habitat sign in a visible location. The certification is for an individual. So when you get the certification, you are certifying that you have this knowledge and you've done the actions. And it's very open and inclusive for all different types of people and backgrounds, abilities, whatever resources and challenges you face. We're happy to work with everybody and find ways for people to become pollinator stewards. So if you'd like to continue on and pursue becoming a certified pollinator steward with Pollinator Partnership, if you're already on the email list and receiving emails from me about becoming a certified pollinator steward, then you don't have to do anything else at this point. Just keep an eye out for a meeting notification that I'll send out to you, which we'll probably be having in early November, where we can all connect, we can talk about steward certification, and we can answer your questions about the process. If you're not on the email list for the group already, if you haven't been receiving emails from me specifically about Pollinator Steward certification, please email me at lm@pollinator.org. And if you're watching this as a recording, this is being recorded on the 16th of October, 2020. So if you're watching this in the future, you can check out pollinatorpartnership.ca for information on certifying as a pollinator steward. Okay, and finally, I do want to give a huge thank you to my partners on this webinar series. This has been, an awful lot of work. It's been a truly collaborative effort, and just a special thanks I want to send out to Amy from Parks Canada, Paige from Habitat Acquisition Trust, and Kristen from Saanich Native Plants. This series would not have been possible without all of you and your amazing efforts and dedication and knowledge. So I'm really grateful. Thank you. And to all of you that have been tuning in as well, I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to have done this, and I'm also thrilled that we can have some certified pollinator stewards in the midst in our community. So I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you, and I thought it would be a great time to hand it over to Sarah and Amy, for mostly Sarah though. She's going to be our moderator for the next few minutes, and looking at the questions. There's some great ones there. So Sarah is getting her tech all lined up for us.
Hello. All right. So we have some great, thank you, Paige, and thank you, Laura, and thank you, Amy. We have some great questions here. The first question, I think this goes out to Paige, Laura, Jill and Paul say that my Pathfinder unit would like to know how they could set up a bee-friendly space as their community project. Where did they start? And I had suggested that perhaps they can contact us at the Habitat Acquisition Trust, and they can also go to our website and check out some of the gardening with native plant resources on there. I think that, creating a native plant garden wherever you can is probably a good way to start. And then if you have specific questions on species of plant, you can always give us a call and we can have a conversation about that too. But maybe, do you want to answer that too, Paige or Laura?
I think you answered it well. If it's sort of how to set up a space and where to find a space, you could certainly look around where you meet or connect with local, the community gardens. You probably got some more ideas from the presentation. You could go and visit other pollinator friendly spaces like Fort Rudd Hill or other spaces that are able to host, and get some ideas that way. And then there's certainly different grants if that's interest. But yeah, just send us an email or give us a call and we can start that conversation.
Great. And then our second question.
I was just going to add to that as well. On the Island Pollinator Initiative website, there is a resources page. So it's got things from a number of different organizations there that can help you get started. One of the maybe easy sort of entry kind of resources is we do have an Eastern Vancouver Island Ecoregion Pocket Guide that's got just a bit of information on the front about pollinators and creating habitat for pollinators, what you want to keep in mind. And then on the back is a list of some great plants for pollinators that are pretty easy to find here, especially through Saanich Native Plants and other native plant providers. So that's a good sort of one pager that can get you started.
Great, thanks, Laura. And then our next question is from Laura Lynn, who says, love to have students learn how to properly clean mason bee cocoons. Is there an opportunity for offering free labor if someone has a connection? So I'm wondering, perhaps Laura Lynn is asking if there's training on how to clean mason bee cocoons, or if there's someone who does that. And then maybe, some that the kids or her class or herself could practice on how to clean those. Great question, Laura Lynn.
That's awesome. There are some videos available online by Gord Hutchings and others too, but I have watched the videos from Hutchings Bee Service that goes through the full process from start to finish on cleaning mason bee cocoons, and goes into a lot of detail. And we do some through Halliburton Farm. It's just seasonal, so if you want to volunteer at the farm, you can participate in that and get the training that way. And you can chat with me if you want about that. Do Laura or Amy have any other ideas on learning about cleaning cocoons?
Well, I think I'd like to highlight that I think people are getting maybe more intimidated by it than they should be. It's really not that hard. It's a super important step, but Laura Lynn, I bet you could check out a video online and be perfectly capable of doing it with your students. Yeah, it's really not that complicated. It needs to be done, but yeah, there's great videos. Check those out.
And her other question was just, is this finished for this year now? Like, is there a certain time of year that she could be doing this?
Yes, usually kind of end of summer, beginning of fall is sort of a typical time to clean your cocoons, but it's not too late to do it now. Certainly if you have boxes up, then I would definitely encourage you to take them out of the sort of the exposed elements and start that cleaning process, you know, as soon as you're able to. Yeah.
Thanks, Paige. That's great. And another comment from Bonnie. This is great. Many members of the public are looking for a very short, easy to remember action item that they can do for pollinators. Many people think that they should plant, oops, 1 second. Plant milkweed for monarchs, put up a mason bee box, become a beekeeper, or plant non-native butterfly bush. Is there a very simple message that is appropriate for Vancouver Island that we could share, for example, one species of native plant that would be a good plant for a multitude of pollinators? That's a great question. Yeah, you know, a one plant to go to, I would say potentially gumweed, as there's a lot of different pollinators that really like gumweed, you know, from moths to butterflies to different species of bee. And gumweed is quite versatile. Maybe Paige or Amy or Laura, you have other suggestions. It's a great question.
Yeah, that is great. You know, people want a simple way, and there are simple ways. So one thing I would say is just mow less. Mow your lawn a bit less, or raise your mower height. You know, you don't even have to go out and buy anything and plant anything, and you're actually doing less. In terms of plants that I would recommend, I think we all probably have our like own personal favorites. A gumweed is definitely one of mine. One that I think would be really friendly and kind of easy for people is woolly sunflower. It has a really long bloom and it's just beautiful mats, creates great mats. Goldenrod is an excellent one as well. It can be a little bit less behaved in a garden because it is rhizotomous, but it's great if you want a plant to spread, like Paige showed you in her backyard. So yeah, off the top of my head, those would be, you know, the plants that I would probably say these are easy and use them.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And you could check out Elizabeth Ellie's research on the pollinator lab out of SFU, and a bunch of research went into, you know, pollinator attractive wildflowers. And one of the top ones was camas, the 2 species of camas, and the third one was snowberry. So I think all of those, and you know, the other ones that were already mentioned, would be fantastic ones for pollinators.
Perfect. Thanks, Paige. And then we also have another question from Sarah. Great question. Have any of you had to deal with trying to promote pollinator meadows at schools and getting pushback on the perceived fear of increasing stinging insects near children? Yeah.
Laura, I remember you had a thought about this from before. Do you want to mention that, and then I can chat about it too?
Yeah, sure. And I bet Amy has some input here as well. So, you know, this is a common problem, it's a common issue that's brought up, not just at schools, but also, you know, when we're working with corporations and putting in pollinator gardens or anywhere that's going to be accessible to the public. The first message is that native bees and pollinators are not honeybees. Most people, when they think of bees, they think of honeybees, and often, unfortunately, they're thinking of wasps when they think of bees. So wasps can be a stinging issue. Honeybees to some extent, although less, you know, honeybees aren't aggressive. But when we're putting in pollinator habitat, we're promoting the native pollinators, which by and large are solitary species. They're not aggressive. Some of them have such reduced stingers that they can't even penetrate human skin. So I think getting the message across of what we are actually attracting with these gardens is very important, and it's a good education piece as well. And then getting people out to see what they're promoting and just seeing that bees are vegetarians, I think is a really good message to talk about. They're not interested in your food. They're not interested in people. You can probably touch them when they're pollinating the flowers and they're just going to go about their business. I'm not recommending that, but just try to get that message across to people that they're not likely to sting. And it's a hard one. That's a constant challenge. I appreciate the question.
Amy, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think just similar thoughts, having the Gary Oak Learning Meadow at Fort Red Hill and bringing school groups in and whatnot. We've never really had any challenges with any kinds of reports of stinging or whatnot. I think we always just provide the message, to give pollinators their space and, observe them from a comfortable distance, like a distance that's comfortable for you and comfortable for the pollinator as well. And we pass on those similar kinds of messages that mainly what we're seeing, and actually we never see honeybees at Fort Red Hill at all, but mainly what we're seeing are these very gentle vegetarian native bees.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, you could always use the tip that, female bees are the ones that sting, and a lot less, less than half the world's bees are capable of stinging. So you can say that if you need a fax to drop. And they're really there to forage and, eat or feed their young. They're not really interested in finding someone to sting. If we keep our distance, like Amy said, and give them space, and they're not, not going to come after us or anything. So yeah, it's a good lesson for kids to learn. Nature needs space, wildlife needs space, and it's a great opportunity to teach that lesson.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then one question, which I think is great, and I want to share it. It's already been answered, but Joan was asking, where can she buy a Backyard Bees of North America poster? And Amy said that they ordered theirs from thebeesinourBackyard.com. So you can check that out on Amazon and Etsy. So
yeah, and then I was going to say, it just comes as a rolled up poster. So to protect it, we actually had it, brought it to like a printing shop and had it mounted on a foam board and laminated, just so that we could, just make it last longer.
Yeah, it's a great resource, Amy. When we worked together at the fort, I know it was a lot of fun to bring to different outreach events all over Victoria. It was one of the best resources we had on that, as well as our bee box that actually had the specimens in there as well. And then just one comment from Daphne, which is that Daphne loves the idea of a midsummer pollinator walk, like the Christmas bird count. And I think that's a really great comment and something that hopefully will gain more traction in the future after these series. So
awesome. Great. Well, I guess the last thing is to choose a couple folks who are going to be the recipients of the bee box and then of the cards and the seeds.
Yeah. I think, Jill and Paul, you really started off the question and answer period with great questions, and I think it'd be great to give you the bee box. I think you probably will have a lot of use for it, so I'd love for us to give that to you, Jill and Paul, and then it would be great to give Bonnie the cards, I think, because she's got some great questions, and I think she'll probably be able to put those to good use. But thank you everybody for participating, and it's been a great webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Those are great choices, Sarah, because I'm pretty sure I've seen Bonnie and as well as Jill and Paul on pretty much every webinar this season. So thanks for sticking with us since the summertime.
Great.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
thanks everyone for coming.
Okay. Bye, and please reach out with any questions.
Okay.